When I started working with Orthodox churches, I found that the problem of canon and tradition and artistic originality was a philosophical problem that had not been very well discussed or understood by Orthodox people I was meeting. People tended to see traditional art, especially iconography, as a sort of dichotomy between following the canon, meaning exactly copying historical icons, and doing modern art that's completely, avant-garde and innovative and just decadent self-expression. And it is the problems of the modern movement that would lead one to see such a dichotomy, because there is indeed a problem in modern art of decadent self-expression and art that is ultimately nihilistic and completely unsuitable for liturgical use. And one might see sort of the copying of historical Byzantine art as sort of the opposite of that. And for people to see this as a dichotomy is really, really harmful to the revival of tradition, because tradition is not copying historical art any more than it's decadent self-expression. Tradition is absorbing the beauty of historical art into yourself so that you can then create your own art in your own expression, and yet it still shares the same common beauty as the historical art, the same spiritual content as the historical art, even if it is your own original work and not a copy. This is tradition, and of course we know this. If we look at art history, we can see that an iconographer working in some historical period was not making an exact copy of the icons of some other historical period before him. He was painting icons in his own way, as seemed natural to him, and this is why the icons of the 17th century look different from the icons of the 15th century, and the icons of Romania look different from the icons of Russia, because all of these people were just painting the way that seemed right to them. And because historical people did not have art books and the internet, they didn't actually know very much about the canon of iconography. It was very unlikely that somebody painting in 16th century Russia had been to Constantinople and had seen 6th century Byzantine mosaics. They were simply painting the way their master had taught them to paint, and they might sometimes travel and see icons from other centuries or other places in an old cathedral, and they might get a few ideas from that, and that might affect how they develop their own style. But it was a very natural and intuitive thing, and in no way did artists ever feel like they couldn't express their individuality. It's just that individuality historically was understood as your part in society, that society had a culture, and if you were a painter, you painted in that society's cultural system because you were part of that. There was no antagonism between the individual and the collective in historic traditional society. But of course nowadays there is, because nowadays if you want to become an iconographer, you have to impose that upon yourself deliberately. You have to study iconography, and you have to look at all these historic styles that are available to us in books, and we have to kind of decide which of these styles is going to be the most natural for me, and that's an individual choice. A lot of it's simply a matter of taste. A lot of it's a matter of sort of skill and talent. You might feel that you're capable of painting in a kind of a simple Greek village style, but you're simply not capable of painting in a really refined sort of Andrei Rublev style because you don't have that kind of skill, and that's fine. So you might say, well, I'm going to set that precedent aside and I'm going to draw more from this precedent because it works for me. But artists should never copy. They should always absorb the tradition and then express that out of themselves naturally. And so the Orthodox Arts Journal, we founded that largely to help explain this reality to people. Most of our articles are wrangling with this topic of innovation within tradition, showing how this was done historically, showing how some of the masters of the modern age, people like Photius Contiglu or Leonid Uspensky or Grigory Krug, the famous revivers of canonical iconography in the early 20th century, how did they do it? Because they had very individual styles, and it's also quite clear looking at their work that their style did not only draw from historic examples, it also drew from modernism. Gregory Krug's iconography bears a lot in common with Art Nouveau painting of early 20th century Paris. And Uspensky, was a big friend of Pablo Picasso, and Picasso and Uspensky both felt like they were reviving a more natural medieval way of drawing and painting. And Picasso was looking at medieval altarpieces in Spain, and Uspensky was looking at medieval icons in Russia, and they were both trying to develop a modern way of expressing this medieval idea of simple, intuitive depiction. And so even these famous icon painters did not see their work as in opposition to modernism. They kind of saw the revival of icon painting as part of modernism, but trying to figure out how to do it in a way that was liturgically beneficial to the church. So this is what the Orthodox Arts Journal addresses, and I think it's done a great deal of good in demonstrating to artistically talented young people who might have an interest in going into the field of Orthodox liturgical art that yes, you actually can go into this, and it doesn't mean you have to stifle your creativity. On the contrary, working within a canonical system of liturgical art is a wonderful way of framing your self-expression and your creativity within bounds that will keep it from descending into decadence and nihilism. The boundaries of sort of what is spiritually true and what is aesthetically acceptable in a liturgical context, it's essentially the boundaries of sanity. It's saying that if I'm going to paint a picture that no one would want to see in church, I'm painting something inappropriate. So I'm going to basically say that appropriateness to being in church is the boundaries of sanity, and within those boundaries I can paint anything I want. I can express any emotion I might feel, and if it meets the liturgical test that it seems prayerful in an Orthodox church, well then I know I've not gone too far. Well, the trouble we've all had with the Orthodox Arts Journal lately is that we who have founded it, myself and Jonathan Peugeot in particular, have gotten so busy with our own success in our careers that we have limited time to write articles anymore and limited time to edit and post them. So I've been trying to bring in outside help. I've found a few people who have time to help edit and post articles, and I've been soliciting more people to write for the journal. And I think it's kind of a turning point where Jonathan Peugeot and I need to kind of let it go and find other people who can come in and really drive it. And I'm hoping we'll be able to find the right people to do that. Well, for someone who wants to do traditional style architecture, there are educational programs that teach that at quite a high level. There's Notre Dame's School of Architecture. which teaches traditional classical design as a master's program. And here in Charleston, the American College of the Building Arts teaches classical architectural design as an undergraduate program. So I can highly recommend either of those programs. I can also recommend extensive travels to Europe, just drawing old buildings, visiting old buildings, and trying to absorb that ethos into your heart. And I can also recommend working on a construction site or apprenticing yourself with maybe an alternative builder, or someone who has revived building out of a traditional system like timber frame or load-bearing brick. There are a number of alternative builders like that in the country who take on apprentices and train them in traditional construction practices. And I think a combination of those two, a sort of academic training in classical design and drafting plus construction site apprenticeship experience is kind of critical to being able to design buildings. Architecture is a very difficult profession. It requires a kind of white-collar academic set of knowledge and disciplines, knowledge of art history, knowledge of building sciences, structural engineering, insulation, mechanical systems, and so forth, things that you can really only learn in school. But then it also really it requires an understanding of how things are made, how you build stuff on a construction site, what does each tool in a workshop do, how do you join wood together in ways that won't fall apart, what are all the finishes that are available, and how do you tell people what to do to get the finish you want. And this can only be learned from just making things yourself, working in a workshop or on a construction site. So yeah, it requires a lot of years of training to be able to do this. It also requires a kind of an innate aesthetic sense and a talent for drawing. So it's something that takes a real commitment. Not everybody can do it.
Did years burn out those words? Did a voice whisper absurd? Did your mind comprehend and ask if you'd last till the end? Traded money and lands, family dreams and plans, for a desert exile and a life of trial.